You know what time it is? Woo! Get into it! Yes! Hi, it's Storytime with Chris, and we are back. So, y'all, we are about to enter into chapter 23. We literally have 24, 25, 26. We have 3 chapters left, and we are done with the Neverending story. This Neverending story. Because as we discovered in the first part of this book, as Bastian is reading the Neverending story, somebody, myself, is reading about the fact that he's reading it. Somebody's reading the fact about that I'm reading about the fact that Bastian is reading the Neverending story. And somebody is reading about that person. So it is a metaversal conundrum. And I love it. And shout out to the Yellow Springs t-shirt shop because this mug is made in their shop. They do a lot of really cool designs. Please check them out because this is pretty awesome. I love flowers, love floral prints of any kind. Cards, comforters, jackets, cardigans, trench coats. All of it. I do not own the music that you're listening to in the background. So, let's get started because after this I'm going to the gym to pump the iron, and we will continue the story because now Bastian doesn't have any memories and is now pursuing Atreyu because they had this big battle, which I stand by what I said the last time, that the way the battle at the Ivory Tower is described, it's pretty epic. It's as epic as the Battle of Pelennor feels. It's as epic as the battle against Thanos and all of the Avengers and Marvel heroes. It's as big as the final battle between the Justice League from the Zack Snyder cut, because that's the only one that's actually valid, against Steppenwolf and Darkseid soldiers. It's about as epic as Sucker Punch. That movie was pretty cool. Not gonna lie. It's about as epic as that moment when Aladdin faces Jafar in that final battle where he transforms into a giant snake. It's that cool. I stand by what I said. Everybody's allowed to have a differing opinion. But if they ever took the time, which Michael Ende is deceased if I'm not mistaken, if they ever got the ability to get the movie rights to the book of the Neverending story, the person I immediately think of that could do it justice, Peter Jackson, Steven Spielberg, or no, Ridley Scott's too dark. Never mind. I was gonna say Ridley Scott because I have a lot of love and respect for him, but too dark. But yeah, Peter Jackson immediately comes to mind. Or, and I can never get her name right, but it's Ava DuVernay. I profusely apologize for butchering her name, but she's an amazing black director. She directed the Disney remake of A Wrinkle in Time. It's pretty good too. That could also be a series we could read on Storytime with Chris. You know what? I might as well write that down so I don't forget. Oh, I was like, where are my pens? Perfect. Hold on one second, y'all. My apologies. Because those books were pretty awesome when I was a kid. All 5 of the books involved with that series. So we could definitely read that. There we go. We can all agree that I'm sorry, y'all. So I'm reading comments before I start. So, Eric, we can all agree that The Hobbit should have been done in one movie. There was no reason to split The Hobbit into 3 parts. Only reason why they did that is 1, to make more money. 2, to give connectivity to certain events that connect to the events of the Lord of the Rings. That's pretty much, in my mind, the only reason why they did 3 movies. And because they were like, yeah, just go ahead and make us money. But no, we could all agree that the Hobbit could have been done in 1 movie. It could have been done in 2.5 hours. It could have been done in 3 hours if you wanted to go that far, but The Hobbit could have been done in one movie. There really was no reason to do it in 3 movies. Other than for him to say, like, I got another trilogy under my belt that's successful. But yeah, I thought Mortal Engines was pretty good. I thought that was pretty good. Maybe I'm wrong. Everybody's allowed to have an opinion. And I appreciate you, my friend. Okay. All right. Chapter 23. The City of the Old Emperors. Because remember, Bastian called himself the childlike emperor because the childlike empress has disappeared. She's nowhere to be found, and so he appointed himself through Zaida's manipulation as the Emperor Fantastica. And we will see what happens next. While Bastian was racing through the pitch-black night miles ahead, his companions were still making preparations for departure. Most were exhausted, and none had anything approaching Bastian's strength and endurance. Even the armored giants on their metallic horses had a hard time getting started, and the foot sloggers couldn't manage to fall into their mechanical tramp. Zaida's wheel, which moved them, seemed to have reached the limits of its power. Her coral litter had been devoured by flames. A new conveyance had been built out of shattered weapons and charred planks from the ivory tower, but it looked more like a gypsy wagon than a litter. The rest of the army hobbled and shuffled along as best as they could. Even Hycerion, Hisbald, and Hydord, who had lost their horses, had to hold one another up. No one spoke, but they all knew they would never be able to overtake Bastian. On he galloped through the darkness, his black mantle flapping wildly in the wind, the metallic limbs of his gigantic horse creaking and grinding at every movement as the great hooves pounded the earth. "Gee up!" cried Bastian. "Gee up! Gee up!" The horse wasn't running fast enough for him. He was determined to overtake Atreyu and Falcor at all costs, even if it meant riding this metallic monster to its death. He wanted vengeance. He would have attained the goal of all his wishes if Atreyu hadn't interfered. Bastian had not become Emperor of Fantastica, and for that he would make Atreyu repent. The joints of Bastian's metallic steed growled and creaked louder and louder, but it still obeyed its rider's will. Bastian rode for hours and hours through the endless night. In his mind's eye he saw the flaming ivory tower. Over and over he lived the moment when Atreyu had set the point of his sword to his chest, and then for the first time he asked himself why Atreyu had hesitated. Why, after all that had happened, could he bring himself to strike Bastian and take Orin by force? And suddenly Bastian thought of the wound he had inflicted on Atreyu and the look in Atreyu's eyes as he staggered and fell. Bastian put Secondo, which up until then he had been clutching in his fist, back into its rusty sheath. In the first light of dawn he saw he was on a heath. Dark clumps of juniper suggested motionless groups of gigantic hooded monks or magicians with pointed hats. And then suddenly, in the midst of a frantic gallop, Bastian's metal steed burst into pieces. Bastian lay stunned by the violence of his fall. When he finally picked himself up and rubbed his bruised limbs, he found himself in the middle of a juniper bush. He crawled out into the open. The fragments of the horse lay scattered all about as though an equestrian monument had exploded. Bastian stood up, threw his black mantle over his shoulders, and with no idea where he was going, started walking in the direction of the rising sun. But a glittering object was left behind in the juniper bush, the belt Gimal. Bastian was unaware of his loss and never thought of the belt again. Ilwan had saved it from the flames for nothing. A few days later, Gimal was found by a black bird who had no suspicion of what this glittering object might be. She carried it to her nest, but that's the beginning of another story that shall be told another time. At midday, Bastian came to a high earthen wall that cut across the heath. He climbed to the top of it. Behind it, in a crater-like hollow, lay a city. At least the quantity of buildings made Bastian think of a city, but it was certainly the weirdest one he had ever seen. The buildings seemed to be jumbled every which way without rhyme or reason, as though they had been emptied at random out of a giant sack. There were neither streets nor squares, nor was there any recognizable order. And the buildings themselves were crazy. They had front doors in their roofs, stairways which were quite inaccessible and ended in the middle of nowhere, towers slanted, balconies dangled vertically, there were doors where one could have expected windows, and floors in the places of walls. Bridges stopped halfway as though the builders had suddenly forgotten what they were doing. There were towers built like bananas, and pyramids standing on their tips. In short, the whole city seemed to have gone mad. Then Bastian saw the inhabitants, men, women, and children. They were built like ordinary human beings, but dressed as if they had lost the power to distinguish between clothing and objects intended for other purposes. On their heads they wore lampshades and sand pails, soup bowls, waste paper baskets, or shoe boxes. Their bodies were swathed in towels, carpets, big sheets of wrapping paper, or barrels. Many were pushing or pulling handcarts with all sorts of junk piled up on them. Broken lamps, mattresses, dishes, rags, and knickknacks. Others were carrying enormous bales slung over their shoulders. The farther Bastian went into the city, the thicker became the crowd, but none of these people seemed to know where they were going. Several times Bastian saw someone dragging a heavy-laden cart in one corner, then after a short time doubling back and a few minutes later changing direction again. Everybody was feverishly active. Bastian decided to speak to one of these people. "What's the name of this place?" The person let go his cart, straightened up, and scratched his head for a while as though thinking it over. Then he went away, abandoning his cart, which he had seemed to have forgotten. But a few minutes later, a woman took hold of the cart and started off with it. Bastian asked her if the junk was hers. The woman stood for a while, deep in thought. She, too, went away. Bastian tried a few more times, but received no answer. Suddenly, he heard someone giggling. "No point in asking them," said the giggler. "They can't tell you anything." One might, in a manner of speaking, call them the know-nothings. Bastian turned toward the voice and saw a little gray monkey sitting on a wooden ledge, or rather, what would have been a window ledge if the window hadn't been upside down. The animal was wearing a mortar board with a dangling tassel, seemed to be busy counting something on his fingers and toes. Oh, it's a woodpecker, y'all. I wish I could show you, but that was that tapping sound you may have heard for those who heard that noise. Where'd he go? There he is. Yes. He's a big one, too. I guess he wanted to listen into the story. The animal was wearing a mortar board with a dangling tassel and seemed to be busy counting something on his fingers and toes. When he had finished, he grinned and said, "Sorry to keep you waiting, sir. But there was something I had to figure out." "Who are you?" Bastian asked. "My name is Argax," said the little monkey, lifting his mortar board. "Pleased to meet you, and with whom have I the pleasure?" "My name is Bastian Balthazar Books." "Just as I thought," said the monkey, visibly pleased. "And what is the name of this city?" Bastian inquired. "It hasn't got an actual name," said Argax, "but one might, in a manner of speaking, call it the City of Emperors." "Old emperors?" Bastian repeated with consternation. "Why, I don't see anybody who looks like an old emperor." "You don't?" said the monkey with a giggle. "Well, believe it or not, all the people you've seen were emperors of Fantastica in their time, or wanted to be." Bastian was aghast. "How do you know that, Argax?" The monkey lifted his mortar board and grinned. "I, in a manner of speaking, am the superintendent here." Bastian looked around. Not far away, an old man had dug a pit. He put a lighted candle into it, then shoveled earth over the candle. The monkey giggled. "What would you say to a little tour of the town, sir? To get acquainted, in a manner of speaking, with your future residents." "No," said Bastian. "What are you talking about?" The monkey jumped up on his shoulder. "Let's go," he whispered. "It's free of charge. You've already paid the admission fee." Bastian obeyed the monkey's orders, though he would rather have run away. He grew more miserable with every step. He watched the people and was struck by the fact that they didn't talk. They were all so busy with their own concerns that they didn't even seem to see one another. "What's wrong with them?" Bastian asked. "Why are they so odd?" "Nothing odd about them," said Argax. "They're just like you. In a matter of speaking, or rather, they were in their time." Bastian stopped in his tracks. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that they're humans? Argax jumped up and down on Bastian's shoulder. Exactly, he said gleefully. Bastian saw a woman in the middle of the street trying to spear peas with a darning needle. How did they get here? What are they doing here? Oh, there have always been humans who couldn't find their way back to their world, Argax explained. First they didn't want to, and now in a matter of speaking, they can't. Why can't they? Bastian looked to a little girl who was struggling to push a doll's cart with square wheels. They'd have to wish it, and they've stopped wishing. They'd used up their last wish for something else. Their last wish? Said Bastian, going deathly pale. Can't a person go on wishing as long as he pleases? Argax giggled again, then he tried to take off Bastian's turban and picked lice out of his hair. Stop that! Bastian cried. He tried to shake the little monkey off, but Argax held on tight and squealed with pleasure. No, no, he chattered. You can only wish as long as you remember your world. These people here used up all their memories. Without a past, you can't have a future. That's why they don't get older. Just look at them. Would you believe that some of them have been here 1,000 years and more? But they stay just as they are. Nothing can change for them because they themselves can't change anymore. Bastian watched a man who had lathered a mirror and was starting to shave it. Once that might have struck him as funny, now it made him break out in goose flesh. Goose flesh, kids, is another way of saying getting goosebumps. So, like, when a chill runs down your spine or you see little goosebumps on you, goose flesh is another way. It's a turn of phrase. It's another way of putting it. He hurried on and soon realized that he was going deeper into the city. He wanted to turn back, but something drew him onward like a magnet. He began to run and tried to get rid of the bothersome gray monkey, but Argax clung fast and even spurred him on. Faster, faster! Bastian stopped running. He realized that he couldn't escape. You mean, he gasped for breathing, that all these people here were once emperors of Fantastica? Or wanted to be? That's it, said Argax. All the ones who can't find their way back try sooner or later to become emperor. They didn't all make it, but they all tried. That's why there are two kinds of fools here, though the result, in a matter of speaking, is the same. What two kinds? Tell me, Argax, I have to know. Easy does it, said the monkey, giggling as he tightened his grip on Bastian's neck. The one kind gradually used up their memories, and when they had lost the last one, Orin couldn't fulfill their wishes anymore. After that, they came here, in a manner of speaking, automatically. The others, the ones who crowned themselves emperor, lost all their memories at one stroke. So the same thing happened. Orin couldn't fulfill their wishes anymore, because they had none left. As you see, it comes to the same thing. Here they are, and they can't get away. Do you mean that they all had Orin at one time? Naturally, said Argax, but they forgot it long ago. And it wouldn't help them anymore, the poor fools. Was it taken away from them? Bastian asked. No, said Argax. When someone crowns himself emperor, it simply vanishes. Obviously, because how, in a matter of speaking, can you use Moonchild's power to take her power away from her? Bastian felt wretched. He would have liked to sit down somewhere, but the little gray monkey wouldn't let him. No, our tour isn't done yet. The best is yet to come. Keep moving. Bastian saw a boy with a heavy hammer trying to drive nails into a pair of socks. A fat man was trying to paste postage stamps on soap bubbles. They kept bursting, but he went on blowing new ones. Look! Bastian heard the giggling voice of Argax and felt his head being twisted by the monkey's little hands. Look! Over there! It's so amusing! Bastian saw a large group of people, men and women, young and old, all in the strangest clothes. They didn't speak. Each one was alone with himself. On the ground lay a large number of cubes, and there were letters on all 6 sides of the cubes. The people kept jumbling the cubes and then staring at them. What are they doing? Bastian whispered. What sort of game is that? It's called the Jumble Game, answered Argax. He He motioned to the players and cried out, "Good work, children! Keep at it! Don't give up!" Then turning back to Bastian, he whispered in his ear, "They can't talk anymore. They've lost the power of speech, so I thought about this game for them. As you see, it keeps them busy. It's very simple. If you stop to think about it, you'll have to admit that all the stories in the world consist essentially of 26 letters. The letters are always the same, only the arrangement varies. From letters, words are formed, from words, sentences, from sentences, chapters, and from chapters, stories. Now take a look. What do you see there?" Bastian read. And this is what he read. If you can find words in there, kudos to you. Or you can, kind of like a cross, not a crossword puzzle, I'm losing my train of thought, my apologies. Which I need to get a crossword puzzle book. I like crosswords. And I like word search. There we go. "Yes, of course," said Argax with a giggle. It usually makes no more sense than that. But if you keep at it for a long time, words turn up now and then. Not very brilliant words, but still words. Spinach cramp, for instance, or sugar brush, or nose polish. And if you play for 100 years, or 1,000, or 100,000, the law of chances tell us that a poem will probably come out. And if you play it forever, every possible poem, every possible story will ever to come out. In fact, every story about a story, and even this story about the two of us chatting here, it's only logical, don't you think?" "It's horrible," said Bastian. "I wouldn't say that," said Argax. "It depends on your point of view. It keeps these people, in a matter of speaking, busy. And anyway, what else can we do with them in Fantastica?" After a long time, Bastian watched the players in silence. Then he asked under his breath, "Argax, you know who I am, don't you?" "Of course I do. Is there anyone in Fantastica who doesn't?" "Tell me one thing, Argax. If I had become emperor yesterday, would I already be here now?" "Today or tomorrow, the monkey, or next week, one way or another, you'd have ended up here." "Then Atreyu saved me?" "You got me there," the monkey admitted. "But he had succeeded in taking the gem away from me. What would have happened then?" The monkey giggled again. "You would have ended up here, in a matter of speaking. All the same." "Why?" "Because you need Orin to find the way back. But frankly, I don't believe you'll make it." The monkey clapped his little hands, lifted his mortar bar, and grinned. "Tell me, Argax, what must I do?" "Find a wish that will take you back to your world." After a long silence, Bastian asked, "Argax, can you tell me how many wishes I have left?" "Not very many, in my opinion. 3 or 4 at the most, and that will hardly be enough. You're beginning rather late, and the way back isn't easy. You'll have to cross the Sea of Mist. That alone will cost you a wish. What comes next, I don't know. No one in Fantastica knows what road you people must take to get back to your world. Maybe you'll find yours mid-round. That's the last hope for people like you. But I'm afraid that for you it's a matter of speaking too far. Be that as it may, you will, just this once, find your way out of the city of the old emperors." "Thanks, Argax," said Bastian. The little gray monkey grinned. "Goodbye, Bastian Balthasar Bucks." And with one leap, Argax vanished into one of the crazy houses, and he had taken Bastian's turban with him. For a while, Bastian stood motionless. He was so stunned by what he had just heard that he couldn't decide what to do. All his plans had collapsed at one stroke. His thoughts seemed to have been stood on end, like the pyramid he had seen. What he had hoped was his ruin, and what he had feared his salvation. At the moment, only one thing was clear to him. He must get out of this insane city and never come back. He started through the jumble of crazy buildings. He soon discovered that it was much harder to get out than to get in. Time and time again he lost his way and found himself back in the center of the city. It took him all afternoon to reach the earthworks. Then he ran out into the heath and kept going until black night, as black as the night before, forced him to stop. Exhausted, he collapsed under a juniper tree and fell into a deep sleep. While he slept, the memory that he could once make up stories left him. All night he had the same unchanging vision before his eyes. Atreyu, with a gaping wound in his chest, stood there looking at him in silence. Awakened by a thunderclap, Bastian started up. Deep darkness lay all around him, but the massive clouds that had been gathering for days had been thrown into a wild disorder. Lightning flashed, thunder shook the earth, the storm wind howled over the heath, and the juniper trees were bowed to the ground. Rain fell in dense sheets. Bastian arose and stood there wrapped in his black mantle. The water ran down his face. Lightning struck a tree directly in front of him and split the gnarled trunk. The branches went up in flames. The wind blew in a shower of sparks over the heath. In a moment they were doused by the rain. The crash had thrown Bastian to his knees. He dug into the earth with both hands. When the hole was big enough, he unslung the sword Skyden and put it in. "Skyden," he said, "I am taking leave of you forever. Never again shall anyone draw you against a friend. No one shall find you here until what you and I have done is forgotten." He filled in the hole, covered it with moss and branches, lest anyone should discover it. There Skyden lies to this day, for not until far in the future will one come who can wield it without danger, but that is another story. It shall be told another time. Bastian went his way through the darkness. Toward morning the storm abated, the wind died down, and there was no other sound than the rain dripping from the trees. The night was the beginning of a long, lonely journey for Bastian. He no longer wished to return to his traveling companions or Skyden. Now he wanted to find the way back to the human world, but he didn't know how or where to look for it. Was there somewhere a gate, a bridge, a mountain pass that he would take him back? He had to wish for it, that he knew, but he had no power over his wishes. He felt like a diver who was searching the bottom of the sea for a sunken ship but keeps being driven to the surface before he can find anything. He also knew that he had few wishes left, so he was careful not to use Orin. He was determined to sacrifice his last few remaining memories only if he felt sure that this would help him get back to his world. But wishes cannot be summoned up or kept away at will. They come from deeper within us than good or bad intentions, and they spring up unannounced, which is very true about life. We wish for things that we don't necessarily plan on or even really meditate upon. They just pop up. And everything in life, everything, every invention that one has made in this world and the next, or any historical monument, any invention, any cultural movement, all starts with a wish. And so before he knew it, a new wish arose within him and little by little took form. For days and nights he had been wandering all alone, and because of being alone he yearned to belong to some sort of community, to be taken into a group, not as a master or victor or as any special sort of person, but merely as one among many, perhaps as the smallest or least important, provided his membership in the community was unquestioned. And then one day he came to a seacoast, or so he thought at first. He was standing at the edge of a sheer cliff, and before him lay a sea of congealed white waves. It was some time before he realized that these waves were not really motionless, but were moving very slowly. But there were currents and eddies that moved as imperceptibly as the hands of a clock. He had come to the Sea of Mist. Bastian walked along the cliff. The air was warm and slightly damp. There was not the slightest breeze. It was early morning, and the sun shone on the snow-white surface of the fog, which extended into the horizon. He walked for several hours. Toward noon he espied a small town some distance from the shore. Supported by piles, it formed a sort of island in the Sea of Mist. The long arching bridge connecting the town with the rocky coast swayed gently as Bastian crossed it. The houses were relatively small. The doors, windows, and stairways all seemed to have been made for children. And indeed, the people moving about the streets were no bigger than children, though they all seemed to be grown men with beards or women with pinned-up hair. As Bastian soon noticed, these people looked so much alike that he could hardly tell them apart. Faces were dark brown like moist earth, and they looked calm and gentle. When they saw Bastien, they nodded at him, but none spoke. Altogether they seemed a silent lot. The place was humming with activity, yet he seldom heard a cry or a spoken word, and never did he see any of these people alone. They always seemed to went about in groups, if not in crowds, locking arms or holding one another by the hand. When Bastien examined the houses more closely, he saw that they were all made of some sort of wicker, some crude and some of a finer weave, and the streets were paved with the same kind of material. Even the people's clothing, he noticed, their trousers, skirts, jackets, and hats were of wicker work, though these were artfully woven. Everything in the town seemed to be made of the same material, which, by the way, shout out to my Auntie Diane. She more than likely will not see this video because she doesn't utilize social media like that. But she had this white wicker bench that she had on her back porch, and I always used to love laying on it and taking naps out there. It was super comfortable. Comment below if you've had a special place in your childhood where you could like hang out and be yourself. Here and there, Bastien was able to cast a glance into the artisans' workshops. They were all busy weaving, making shoes, pitchers, lamps, cups, and umbrellas of wickerwork. But never did he see anyone working alone, for these things could be made only by several persons working together. It was a pleasure to see how cleverly they coordinated their movements, and as they worked they usually sang some simple melody without words. The town was not very large, and Bastien had soon come to the edge of it. There he saw hundreds of ships of every size and shape. The town was a seaport, but of a most unusual kind. For all these ships were hanging from gigantic fishing poles, and hovered swaying gently over a chasm full of swirling white mist. These ships, made of wickerwork like everything else, had neither sails, nor masts, nor oars, nor rudders. Bastien leaned over the railing and looked down into the sea of mist. He was able to gauge the length of the stakes supporting the town by the shadows they cast on the white surface below. At night, he heard a voice beside him say, "The mists rise to the level of the town, that we can put out to sea. In the daytime, the sun reduces the mist and the level falls. That's what you wanted to know, isn't it, stranger?" 3 men were leaning against the rail beside Bastien, who seemed gentle and friendly. They got to talking, and in the course of his conversation with them, Bastien learned that the town was called Yiskal, or Basketville. Its inhabitants were known as Yiskalnari. The word meant roughly the partners. The 3 were mist sailors. Not wishing to give his name for fear of being recognized, Bastien introduced himself as someone. The 3 sailors told him that Yiskalnari had no names for individuals and didn't find it necessary. They were all Yiskalnari, and that was enough for them. Since it was lunchtime, they invited Bastien to join them, and he gratefully accepted. They went to a nearby inn, and during the meal, Bastien learned all about Basketville and its inhabitants. The sea of mist, which they called the Skyden, was an enormous ocean of white vapor which divided the 2 parts of Fantastica from each other. No one had ever found out how deep the Skyden was or where all this mist came from. It was quite possible to breathe below the surface of the mist and to walk some distance on the bottom of the sea near the coast, where the mist was relatively shallow, but only if one was tied to a rope and could be pulled back. For the mist had one strange property. It fuddled one's sense of direction. Any number of fools and daredevils had died in the attempt to cross the Skyden alone and on foot. Only a few had been rescued. The only way to reach the other side was in the ships of the Yiskalnari. The wicker work from which the houses, implements, clothing, and ships of Yiskal were made were woven from a variety of rushes that grew under the surface of the sea not far from the shore. These rushes, as can easily be gathered from the foregoing, can be cut only at the risk of one's life. Though unusually pliable and even limp in ordinary air, they stood upright in the sea, because they were lighter than the mist. That was what made the wickerwork ships mist-worthy, and if any of the Yiskalnari chanced to fall into the mist, his regular clothing served the purpose of a life jacket. But the strangest thing about the Yiskalnari, so it struck Bastien, was the word "I" seemed unknown to them. In any case, they never used it, but in speaking of what they thought or did always said, "we." When he gathered from the conversation that the 3 sailors would be putting out to sea that night, he asked if he could ship with them as a cabin boy. They informed him that a voyage on the Skyden was very different from any other ocean voyage because no one knew how long it would take or exactly where it would end up. When Bastien said that didn't worry him, they agreed to take him on. At nightfall, the mists began to rise, and by midnight they had reached the level of Basketville. Ships that had been dangling in midair were now floating on the white surface. The moorings on the one in which Bastien found himself, a flat barge about 100 feet long, were cast off, and he drifted slowly out into the sea of mist. The moment he laid his eyes on it, Bastien wondered what propelled this sort of ship, since he had neither sails nor oars nor propeller. He soon found out that sails would have been useless, for there was seldom any wind on the Skyden, and their oars and propellers did not function in mist. These ships were moved by an entirely different sort of power. In the middle of the deck there were a rough, round, slightly raised platform. Bastien had noticed it from the start and taken it from a sort of captain's bridge. Indeed, it was occupied throughout the voyage by 2 or more sailors. The men on the platform held one another clasped by the shoulders and looked fixedly forward. At first sight they seemed to be standing motionless. Actually, they were swaying very slowly in perfect unison, in a sort of dance which they accompanied by chanting over and over again in a simple and strangely beautiful tune. At first Bastien regarded the song and dance as some sort of ceremony, the meaning of which escaped him. Then on the 3rd day of the voyage he asked one of his 3 friends about it. Evidently surprised at Bastien's ignorance, the sailor explained that these men were propelling the ship by thought power. More puzzled than ever, Bastien asked if some sort of hidden wheels were set in motion. "No," one of the sailors replied. "When you want to move your legs, you have only to think about it. You don't need wheels, do you?" The only difference between a person's body and a ship was that to move a ship, or at least 2 Yskilnari had to merge their thought powers into one. It was this fusion of thought powers that propelled the ship. If greater speed was desired, more men had to join in. Normally, thinkers worked in ships of 3. The others rested, for easy and pleasant as it looked, thought propulsion was hard work, demanding intense and unbroken concentration, but there was no other way of sailing the Skyden. Bastien became the student of the mist navigators and learned that the secret of their cooperation, dance and song without words. Little by little, in the course of a long journey, he became one of them. During the dance he felt his thought power merging with those of the companions to form a whole, and this gave him a strange and indescribably sense of harmony and self-forgetfulness. He felt accepted by a community, at one with his companions, and at the same time he totally forgot that the inhabitants of the world from which he came, and to which he was seeking the way back, were human beings, each with his own thoughts and opinions. Dimly he remembered his home and parents, but nothing more. Stop that. My stomach growled, sorry. His wish to be no longer alone had come true. But now, deep in his heart, a new wish arose, began to make itself felt. One day it struck him that the Yskilnari lived together so harmoniously, not because they blended different ways of thinking, but because they were so much alike that it cost them no effort to form a community. Indeed, they were incapable of quarreling or of disagreeing, because they did not regard themselves as individuals. Thus there were no conflicts or differences to overcome, and it was just this sameness, this absence of stress that gradually came to pall on Bastien. Their gentleness bored him, and the unchanging melody of their songs got on his nerves. He felt that something was lacking, something he hungered for, but he could not yet have said what it was. This became clear to him some time later, when a giant mist crow was sighted. Stricken with terror, sailors vanished below deck as fast as they could, but one was not quick enough. The monstrous bird swooped down with a cry, seized the poor fellow, and carried him away in its beak. When the danger was past, the sailors emerged and resumed their song and dance as though nothing had happened. Their harmony was undisturbed, and far from grieving, they didn't waste so much as a word on the incident. "Why should we grieve?" said one of them, when Bastien inquired. "None of us is missing." With them the individual counted for nothing. No one was irreplaceable, because they drew no distinction between one man and another. Bastien, however, wanted to be an individual, a someone, not just one among others. He wanted to be loved for being just what he was. In this community of Yskilnari there was harmony, but no love. He no longer wanted to be the greatest, strongest, or cleverest. He had left all that far behind. He longed to be loved just as he was, good or bad, handsome or ugly, clever or stupid, for all his faults, or possibly because of them. But what was he actually like? He no longer knew. So much had been given to him in Fantastica, and now, among all these gifts and powers, he could no longer find himself. He stopped dancing with the mist sailors. All day long, and sometimes all night as well, he sat in the prow, looking out over the Skyden. At last, the crossing was completed, and the mist ship docked. Bastian thanked the Yiskonari and went ashore. This was a land full of roses. There were whole forests of roses of every imaginable color. A winding path led through the endless rose garden, and Bastian followed it. That, my friends, is there we will end for today. I will see y'all later. Much love to y'all. Have a great day, okay? Be good to each other.